After accusing black people of being racist against white people, Steven Crowder declares slavery was never racially motivated. You're probably more black people right now who have preconceived negative idea of white people or than what white people maybe have of black people. Okay. Okay. Honestly, I don't know. Okay, let's just play the clip first before we say anything.
I think that this idea that your race is supreme is incredibly rare, but I think that actual racism, meaning that you have, not even necessarily that you view them as inferior, but a predetermined negative worldview.
To be clear, today we also covered 3 people being found guilty for lynching a black man in Georgia, Mr. Arbery. Just throwing it out there.
Of someone because of their race. Can happen in any group of people. Yeah. And I do think, actually, we're probably at a point where it happens more. You probably have more black people right now because of what they're being fed by the media who have a preconceived, incorrect, negative idea of what white people are than white people maybe have of black people. I don't...
Okay, can we talk about the ridiculous of the statement for a moment? Okay, so let's pretend for a second that... Let's actually give him a lot here, okay? Let's actually pretend that it's equal. It's an equal number, or it's whatever number. There's no way we can tell, okay? Let's pretend that for a moment. It is almost probably statistically impossible for what Crowder said to be true. Because remember, white people are like 66% of the population, and black people are 13% of the population. So what you're saying is that a certain percentage, which is what? Maybe 20, 30%, if we're like being as generous as possible, of the black population. So what? 2, 3, maybe 4, that would be massive, percent of the black population believe this of white people. There is less there that percentage. Well, we're saying 4% out of the 13, right? Which would be like 30, 40, right? Somehow overcomes the 66% white people, whatever percentage they have. There's just so many more white people than there are black people. That is literally statistically impossible. Unless black people are the most racist people to ever exist in the history of the world, with which, by the way, with the existence of slavery in this country, I feel like white people have them beat historically, right? Unless that's the case, it's statistically impossible. Just the numbers alone make it impossible.
I don't know. Maybe it's a 50-50 split, but it certainly is something. All groups can be racist, and the left just argues but only one can be systemically oppressive. Do you guys know? Maybe you guys can bring this up. The number. Do you guys know how many slaves?
Even if you were to say half of black people were racist towards white people, there would still be a good chance that there would still be more racist white people, even if you said it was only 20% or 10% of white people. It's the numbers just don't add up.
There were in the North African sort of like Mediterranean slave trade.
I don't.
Do you know how many?
I don't even have
It was a million. It was a million slaves, right? People who lived on the Mediterranean coast. They were at risk. You guys know about the history of North Africa, the Moors. People, and by the way, they were kidnapping white people.
Yeah.
Just to be clear, this is not something. Slavery is not something that has been racially based.
No.
Ever. Now, it was codified into law because most slaves at a certain point in the United States were black, but you can look at other...
Wait, so it was racially based. In many places in the world, it wasn't, but in the United States, it was. Because if it wasn't racially based, of course, the motivation was profit, but it was 100% race-based. Because if it wasn't, then there would have been white slaves, and there would have been white slaves in 1860 or 1850, or those would have existed. But they didn't. They felt that enslaving black people was perfectly fine, and using them, stealing their labor, was perfectly justifiable because they viewed black people as less than human. Subhuman. I don't understand why.
There are countries where they decided, oh, okay, now we're going to try and ensure that we maintain control over these slaves. And so therefore you look at what are the majority of slaves? All right, we determine them.
Wait, he said the Mediterranean, it's the transatlantic. Okay, be clear. Let's go back here. Let's listen to what he said one more time. He wasn't specifically only talking about the Mediterranean. Listen to what he says.
They were kidnapping white people.
Yeah.
Just to be clear, this is not something, slavery is not something that has been racially based.
No.
Ever. Now, it was codified into law.
Ever. That isn't just talking about the Mediterranean. It was specific. Ever. The institution of slavery. Never racially based.
Because most slaves at a certain point in the United States were black, but you...
So it was. So you immediately why? Why would you fumble like this on stream, live?
can look at other countries where they decided, oh, okay, now we're going to try and ensure that we maintain control over these slaves. And so therefore you look at what are the majority of slaves? All right, we determine them by skin color or ethnicity or where they've come from, like the Indian.
So it was racially based. So it was.
People were enslaved. There are still people enslaved in the world today. Look, slavery is not uniquely American. It was never uniquely American. It still exists outside of the United States of America.
Can I just say, every time I hear this point, I don't understand what's being said here, right? Because the problem is, right? I don't, who's making the argument that slavery in the United States was the only place that slavery existed? I can't think of any public figure who's like, the rest of the world didn't have slavery. That's not a thing that any public figure says. There's no historian that says that. There's no presidential candidate who says that. No politician who says that. There's nobody who says that. So who is he like talking about encountering here? Why say that? I don't understand why it's being brought up.
Slavery was never racially motivated, to be clear. It happened in large numbers, to the tune of millions. Black people enslaving white.
This is just not true. This is just not true. Okay, so the argument here is going to be, well, look, if you look all over the world, people did slavery. Why did they do slavery? They did it for economics. And you want to know what? Of course, a huge motivating factor for slavery was economics. But you want to know what else? Look at the justifications for the secessionists, the Confederates. If you look at the justifications, it wasn't just economics. A huge part of the justification was that black people, due to their violent nature, need to be brought to heel. Right? This is their argument. Therefore, if we end slavery, then before you know it, they will start killing their former slave masters for revenge and go out there and be barbaric and destroy the United States, and it'll bring everything down and race mixing and they instilled fear in the population. And so there were people fighting in defense of slavery during the Civil War for not only economic means that they wanted to steal the labor of black people, but because they viewed black people as subhuman, and that if they gave them their liberty, it would destroy America, it would destroy their lives, because black people are so bad and terrible and evil, and they're going to do all these terrible things. And that was a racial motivation. They believed that there would be a large-scale black uprising that would bring about the destruction of the United States. Now, of course, the idea that such a small part of the population overall would rise up and destroy the United States. I mean, you can look historically at like John Brown's rebellion, right? Like overall on the large scale, it is ridiculous. Even if you look at the counties where there's like majority black population, like you could easily just make the argument like the National Guard's going to come in and it's going to be put, but that didn't matter. It was the fear that black people were going to go around and just kill everybody, destroy America, and everything that's great, holy, and amazing, good apple pie are going to be destroyed. That was racially based. The protection and enshrinement of slavery was racially based to a large extent, and those who defended slavery on multiple occasions in like the founding documents and declarations of secession and in defense of slavery on the public record said, we need to stop the black people from gaining liberty because it'll destroy the world. It'll like destroy the world.
White people as well. And it's wrong across the board. The United States is singularly unique in, however, recognizing and ending slavery because it was incompatible with the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. That is unique. People will say, well, they didn't really have slavery in Britain. Well, that's actually not really true. And certainly if you look at the English Empire, you look at what actually happened to these colonies, right? The United States didn't really have colonies. You look in France, of course, they had rules for slaves. And they had sort of loopholes for servants in England. They still have slavery in African countries.
Can I be honest? I hear this, and every time I can think, you want to know what's more badass than what we did? Even though, like, obviously somebody laying down their life to end bondage is really super badass, and like all the Union troops, of course, I would support and everything. But also to suggest that all the people who fought in the Union Army were doing it for that reason would also be. Anyway, what about Haiti? That happened way before we ended slavery, okay? What happened in Haiti was incredibly fucking amazing, okay? That was people in bondage, picking up guns, going out and saying, fuck you, you will not keep me in bondage, and expelling the people who kept them in bondage. And for doing that, they have been punished ever since. Like, immediately they were punished. The amount of debt they had to pay back from France set them off to a terrible start, and it's not been great ever since. But that expulsion of slavery by force by those who were oppressed in, I think, if I'm right, the only successful large-scale slave rebellion on a national scale is absolutely incredible. You want to support the channel but don't have a lot of money? Well, I just got a sponsorship with the video game Conflict of Nations, which is a pretty cool grand strategy game, which I've tried out myself. I think it's pretty dope. And if you download the game on your phone using the QR code provided and you play it, just a tutorial, you'll be supporting the channel more than you actually think. Like, actually a lot more than you think. And I would deeply appreciate it. You can delete it after if you don't enjoy it, keep playing it if you enjoy it, but it greatly support the channel and I would appreciate it. Anyway.
Countries and in the Middle East. It exists across the world. Yeah. And when you look at why they changed it or slavery was ended, it wasn't ended because all men are created equal. It's for the same reason when people try and say, oh, wait, hold on a second. This is something I was just hearing the other day, and maybe we'll do a whole segment on this. People constantly try to, if you go to college, university, you guys can let me know in chat. You guys have probably heard, right? You've probably heard that property rights are rooted in slavery. Yeah. In owning slaves. Okay, hold on a second. Here's the thing.
Wow.
Other countries at that time had slaves, okay? Other countries had slaves. The United States had slaves. Okay. The United States created property rights, which eventually extended to free slaves. These other countries didn't create property rights laws, to be clear. To be clear, if you look at the property right laws under common law, like I think in the UK, pretty much across most of Europe, it's you have the right to your property and assets to not be seized or forfeit to the government unless, and then there are a bunch of caveats, unless it's deemed for a public good. Right. And the laws are very, very broad. And I get that they're used very rarely here with eminent domain. However, you need to understand, well, no, it wasn't just about maintaining slaves. Now, at that point, slaves were seen as property. Property rights were seen as a natural, a birthright. Read up on Locke to understand why property rights are important. Other countries had slaves.
Okay. So I just had to read hearing this, okay. Well, obviously, black people being able to own property is good. I just had to read a whole book on Tulsa, 1921, for class. And hearing that right off the back of finishing that book is unironically giving me brainworms. Look. The thing is, rights on paper don't really mean anything if they aren't protected by law, right? And I do think that property rights are absolutely wonderful, right? But here's a few problems. People only bring up Tulsa in 1921. A lot of people don't actually realize 1919, the year after black people I believe it was the Devil Dogs. I forget the exact name of the division in the First World War. They came back from home and they marched in parade, right? And when they marched in the parade, they were applauded and they got fist bumps and flowers. But the graciousness for their sacrifice during the war quickly subsided. And then I think 1919 was actually one of the highest, literally 1 year after black people fought in World War One, was the year where I think we actually had the most lynchings. I don't know for sure if that was the year that had the most lynchings, but it had a very, 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 very high number of lynchings. Right? They see the destruction of their property, black people hung from trees and fucking slaughtered. And 2 years after that, and there's like multiple stories I could say about, like, for example, there was this, I believe this was in Tennessee. There was an instance in 1919 where there was a person going to a church, a black person going to a church event, and there was a scuffle with a cop, and a lot of this is still disputed, but eventually the cop and a black defendant who was detained eventually end up dead. And in like a matter of 3 days, the person who scuffled with the cops, their 2 kids are lynched with chains. Their bodies are burnt alive. The church that it happened outside of, the church was burnt down. Tons and tons and tons of black property across the area was burnt down. All of the person's like shit was being targeted, and black people's property all across the area just razed to the ground. And people just hear about Tulsa, right? This wasn't an isolated incident. This happened all throughout, like, post World War One. And I'm just saying World War One. It was, of course, this happened before and after, where not only black people would be physically targeted and lynched, but their property would be destroyed. And a lot of this would specifically happen after black people would, there would be a certain black people in the community that would gain a modicum of wealth and prosperity, right? We're not talking like the biggest capitalists, like they're living in the highest skyscrapers, but they own a truck, or they own a nice house and maybe have a nice yard, maybe a decent amount of cows and a farm. And there would be resentment that is built because this person who is lesser, this is the white supremacist view, this person who's supposed to be lesser than you has more than you, and resentment builds, and then there's basically gasoline poured everywhere, and then all you need is a match. And some incident happens, some allegation, something, like in Tulsa 1921, of course, it was the whatever happened to the fucking elevator, right? And then the match struck, everything burns down. Tulsa was not an isolated incident. It was a repetition of repeated behavior of the targeting of black wealth and black lives. So property rights are great, and it's wonderful on paper, but those property rights only extend as far as the state is willing to defend them. And if you lived in a state that didn't have a governor that was anti-lynching, and yeah, there were governors who were anti-lynching and, let's say, neutral on lynching, whatever the hell that means, right? That would depend on whether your property rights were respected or not. And even then, sometimes the governors wouldn't get involved, and it'd be down to county officials, local sheriffs. You're screwed anyway. So, look, property rights are great, but only as long as the state's willing to defend them. Like, for example, there's multiple nations in the world that say you have the right to free speech, but then if you criticize the government, get arrested and thrown in like a prison camp, right? This all across the world. So if it's on paper, that's great. The question is whether the state is willing to uphold what's on paper.
They didn't do the property rights thing. And so it was never extended to all free people once that evil was ended. You still don't have property rights in a lot of these countries. So it's bullshit. It doesn't work. That's a good litmus test when someone says, well, the United States, this is the reason for it because racism. Hold on a second. You're saying, wait, the police force, this is something else. The police force was created because of racism? Wait, did other countries have police force? Okay, then no. Wait a second. Was the United States the only place to do this at this time? You have to look at what the world was doing that the United States also did and what the United States did that was singularly unique. And that's where you will see a different.
This is also strange because let's say that everything Steven Crowder said here is right. And America's not uniquely racist in any way. Let's just say, like, there's no way, even though there is ways it is uniquely racist, even though a lot of the countries we're talking about also have racism. But let's say in no way it's uniquely racist. In no way whatsoever. It could still be normally racist in comparison to other countries in that would still be bad, and you should still fight against that. That would still be a bad thing, right? If your country, like for example, let's say all the countries of the world have homelessness problems. You still want to take on the homelessness problem just because you're like, well, Germany also has homelessness problem. So you still tackle it. Is the standard of, well, we're so we don't need to do anything on it. So even if he was like, there's literally no way that America is any more racist, whereas even though no one else in the world agrees with this, has no way like a higher level of like these issues, okay? Or specific issues that are isolated in America when it comes to, for examples, like wealth disparity, for example, right? You still fight against the racism because there are countries where like that are most certainly, I guess you could say, statistically more racist than the United States, right? I know there's like organizations that do rankings for it, right? Now let's say we believe the ranking systems. That still means you fight racism. There isn't like we're down to only 20% racism level, so we just are gonna accept that. You still go against it. I don't understand. Whatever. Okay, let's continue.
Pattern and the least systemically racist nation on the face of the earth. It's important that people understand that. It's a really easy way if you don't know the full story, property rights are based in slavery. Go, wait a second, we have property, but other countries had slavery and they didn't create property rights.
Actually, it's a better thing to say that the property rights actually came from your Judeo-Christian background. And really quickly, this is really early on, thou shalt not steal. If there are no property rights, you can't steal. It's everybody's stuff.
Well, that was the Native Americans. Like the Canarsie with Manhattan. They sold it for whatever it was, 30 guilders, and then
that was a bad trade.
They said, all right,
okay, to be clear, there are many societies which don't meet whatever Steven Crowder's talking about here, that if you go steal somebody's stuff, you'll still get arrested, okay? Many of the nations he's talking about that didn't enshrine property rights against you, if you go steal, police aren't just gonna let you go.
we're glad to be here. It's something like 30,000 beaver pelts. I don't know how many thousand tons of lumber. And they're like, oh, and we don't have to live on this godforsaken island where we have to canoe to the boroughs because this is pre-bridge. And then Manhattan started looking nice. Like, oh, we think we'll stay. We're like, no, you can't.
Like what you've done with it.
I love this is ours. Ours?
Yeah, what do you mean?
I'm not familiar.
What is this?
Anyway. Brilliant work from Steven Crowder here. Slavery, no racial elements. Okay, buddy. Oh, wait, to be fair, he didn't say it didn't have racial elements, okay? He said that it wasn't racially motivated. Completely untrue, but not racially motivated whatsoever. Brilliant work by Steven.